Greetings and salutations, everyone. I hope everyone is doing well. Today I have an assortment of terrifying Dogman, Sasquatch, possibly Reptilian, just friggin' cryptid encounters to share with you. Before we get into this upload, though, a couple links I'd like to share. As you know, I rely on my Patreon, my PayPal, and my merch store to help the channel to continue to grow and go. All those links are in the description below. Also, Dogman Frightening Encounters Volume 1, 2, and 3, the audiobook version, written by Tom Lyons, narrated and produced by me, Jeffrey Nadolny, is available on Audible, Amazon, and iTunes. The links to those are in the description below. Now, I've taken enough of your time. Let's get on with today's upload, shall we? Today's first part of the upload. I was at work yesterday talking to one of our cashiers about my recent hiking trip. And when we got talking about Bigfoot in general, a customer overheard and mentioned that he had seen something back in the early 90s at a local park, A.J. Jolly Park in Campbell County, Kentucky. He said he was out hunting for mushrooms and he saw what he called a Bigfoot. He said it climbed up a large tree very quickly and started to jump from one tree to the other, heading away from him. The description he gave was odd. He said it was a dirty blonde, light brown color, covered in hair, had large, pointed ears on the top of its head, but no snout, and had a tail, like a collie dog. He said the arms, hands, and fingers were clearly human, and the forearms were longer, and it had black claws. He said the legs and the butt were human as well, not reversed canine legs like most Dogman are said to have. I asked him more about the face. He said he only got a quick glimpse at the face since he was seeing it from behind. He did say he was sure that it had no snout, as he felt the detail would have stuck out to him. Today's second encounter. I've always had a very deep respect for Native American spirituality, and in all of my learning about different traditions and important figures, I never thought I could ever come into contact with a piece of it. I didn't even think that it was a possibility that these animals were shapeshifters of any sort until I recently was telling my brother about it, and he told me that it might have been. I grew up in the central mountains of Idaho, in between several big mining towns from the late 1800s. And living here for most of my life, I know what wildlife looks like, and I know what I would see at which time of the year, except for a few encounters that I still can't explain. I was out early with my dad and my granddad to go and find a scrap pile to get some firewood from. It was about 7 or 8 in the morning, and we were on a tiny dirt path miles away from any houses. And as we were driving, we turned the corner to see an animal sitting in the middle of the road. I would say that it was about the size of a large dog, but hunched close to the ground and completely black. It had a long tail that dragged on the ground, and when we pulled up to it, it turned and looked at us. Had a small head with either small ears or no ears. I couldn't see anything specific. After it saw us, it hopped off the trail into the bushes on the side of the road. Believe me when I tell you this, I have never in my life seen an animal that looked like this. We were all confused. One other time I was out riding my ATV at around sunset. I was by myself on some trails that I knew well. I decided to explore a bit and took a different path, and suddenly it started to go up a steep hill with lots of washout. As I stopped to try to turn around, the scariest looking bird I have ever seen ran in front of me across the trail. There are a lot of wild chicken, turkey, etc., but this was about the size of a chicken. But it almost appeared as if its body was backwards, or if it was standing straight up, looking very skinny, and just not like a bird. I couldn't see any visible wings, but it had a longer neck, and its head was bare, like a turkey or vulture's maybe. I finished turning around and sped back home. I don't know much about native tribes that would have inhabited this area before the gold rush, but I do know that a lot of violence and death happened because of it, with a historical cemetery having over 100 unmarked graves. If anyone might be able to confirm or deny my theory, I would very much appreciate it. Today's third part of the upload. My name's Eli, I'm 22 years old, and I've always loved being outdoors and in the woods. I remember about 9 years ago, I was 12 to 13, my family moved to Minnesota to help my grandparents. They were getting up there in age and couldn't run the farm like they used to, and just for a change of scenery. A year or so after the move, my two brothers and I got into the habit of running around the edge of the woods along the backsides of the property and exploring where we probably shouldn't have been. With that, after school one day, me and my brothers got our stuff and made the 400 to 500 yard hike to the forest behind our house. My brothers decided to take off and run ahead, about another 300 yards ahead of me, play tackling and just being rambunctious teenagers, while I noticed a bundle of flowers that my grandmother would have loved. As I looked at the flowers, I heard a bit of rustling in the woods about 15 to 20 feet to my right. I didn't think much about it, because, you're in the woods. So I shook my head and went to grab the bunch of flowers to give to my grandmother. No sooner as I reached my hand out to grab them, in my brother's voice, someone called my name for help. It sounded just like my little brother, except it was just off a little bit, like it was being played from a recording. I immediately froze because I looked up and noticed my two brothers were a ways ahead of me playing in the snow. I remember calling for them to hurry up and come with me to the house, and as we turned to run to the house, I noticed a lone coyote moving in between some old beat-up trucks that my grandfather had parked in the pasture on the edge of the woods. But this coyote was considerably larger than any one I have seen up until this point. And what struck me as odd was that this coyote looked like it had gotten hit by a car, and I swear it moved around the trucks. It looked like its paws were on the side of the truck, like it was trying to look over the truck at me. I couldn't help myself. I yelled, "Hey!" to it. And we sat for about a minute or less just staring at each other. Before I could turn and start back, walking to the house, I watched this thing lean around the truck and say in my brother's voice again, "Hey!" When this happened, I yelled for my brothers and booked it to the porch of the house. As my brothers caught up to me, they noticed how pale I was and asked what was wrong. So I told them that I saw a mountain lion, scared of being ridiculed for seeing something so ridiculous. Later that night, I was looking around on the internet, and I found some other encounters by people all over the United States having similar stories, and came across an article about skinwalkers and Dogman, which was both terrifying and interesting. This isn't the only encounter I've had with such entities. I just wanted to get my story out there as a bit of warning that there are things out there that don't really make sense to the human mind. Update. Despite the events that have plagued me in the past, the events in this encounter happened not too far inside of Ocala National Forest in Central Florida. Some sort of cryptid in Florida, go figure, right? So, the day started with a phone call from my brother who asked to take a hike in the national forest outside of our town, and then to spend the night out there in hopes of doing a little fishing and roasting some marshmallows over a fire. It was me, my brother, and his girlfriend, who I see as my loving little sister. So it was going to just be a chill night. We left town and headed to the woods pretty early that day, around 3 p.m. We had gotten to our spot in the woods after 2 hours of riding around trying to find a perfect spot to set up a tent. My brother, sister, and I decided to start the day with some fishing, so we grabbed our rods and tackle box and headed to the little stream about a quarter of a mile from our camping spot. As we came close to the stream, we noticed this awful smell like rotten meat. When we came up to the stream, we found the source of the smell, an abundance of dead fish all around the edge of the stream, and seeing the water had a nasty rust color to it. When we were done gagging at the sight and smell of what was in front of us, a huge sense of dread washed over, with an uncomfortable feeling of being watched. My sister noticed and asked what was wrong, so I played it off like a joke and suggested we go make a fire and set up the tent. So I shrugged it off, not wanting to frighten her. After another 30-minute hike from the stream back to the campground, my brother and sister started collecting wood for the fire, while I started to set up the tent. I set the tent up around the same time they came back with enough wood to have a fire that would last a long time. So we got the fire lit, and I'll admit it was a damn good fire, and we decided to start roasting marshmallows. Before I could eat any, I had to take a leak, so I told them that I was going to step into the woods for a second and pee. I walked about 30 feet into the woods and started to relieve myself when I heard my sister say, "Hello." Finding this extremely odd, I looked around and didn't see anyone or anything, so I went back to my business. As I was zipping up my zipper, I heard her say again, "Hey!" Thinking they were pranking me, I rushed back to the campground to find them still roasting marshmallows over the fire. Kind of freaked out, I asked them if they were messing with me, to which they frowned and explained that they've been in the same spot since I went into the woods. Now terrified, they saw how ghost white I turned and asked me if everything was all right. So I told them what I heard, and they suggested we just go into the tent and go to bed early. So that's what we did. After already taking a while to fall asleep, I woke up in the middle of the night to underbrush crunching right outside of our tent. And the horrible smell from earlier was back, worse than before. For fear of scaring the hell out of my brother and sister, I decided not to wake them. As I sat there shaking and sweating, I noticed the sound of twigs snapping had stopped, and I began to hear what I could swear loud, raspy, heavy breathing like something was trying to sniff out our tent. I quietly tried to lay back down and cover my ears so I couldn't hear the breathing anymore, and eventually fell back to sleep. The next morning we woke up late, so we decided to start packing up our belongings and head home. When we got out of the tent, the first thing we noticed was our cooler was tore up and thrown upside down against a tree with everything that was in it strewn throughout the campsite. Another thing I noticed was I was rolling the tent up was a ton of footprints, weird footprints, that almost looked like normal, except for the obvious claw marks above each toe. Once I spotted these, I hurried up, putting the tent in my truck, and got my brother and sister and myself out of there as quick as possible. As of yet, I have not been gone back camping in any kind of woods. I can't imagine coming across another one of these things. Today's fourth part of the upload. At the time, really it was about 4 years ago, I was walking through a pretty cornfield during a warm summer afternoon because I needed some fresh air and a break from everyone at home. I was on my own without my camera phone. I saw a dog running through the field all by itself. I noticed it was lean and long-legged. As it ran across the path in front of me, it was about 20 feet away. I noticed that it did not have a tail. Still watching this dog, then it went over towards a line of hedges and sat down. Curiously, though, it no longer looked like a dog. It took on a completely different shape, and I was confused as to what I was looking at. It sat down and used its front legs to part open the leaves as a human being uses arms. It then crawled inside the hedge and disappeared. I first saw an animal that was like a dog, running on all fours, lean, long-legged, long snout, pointed ears, and no tail. Then it dropped down in a crouching sitting position, used its front legs as a human would use its arms to open the leaves and crawl under. Wow, just weird. That made me wonder all day. It was a week later, and I almost forgot about this when a loud noise startled us. We were at home, and this sound was so noisy, we went outside. There were neighbors in the street looking up. We looked up and saw a large black helicopter hovering right above the field over our houses. The field was the same one where that dog creature had come from. Today's fifth part of the upload. My husband's grandmother told a story about when she was a little girl. Would have been in the early 20s. One of her older family members was on his deathbed. The family was all at the house taking care of him and grieving as he was almost gone. The front door was propped open as folks were going in and out to get air. Greet people come by to see the family, etc. She said a demon dog of some sort came into the house, ran to the back room and circled the deathbed. They were all freaked out and trying to run it out of the house. Apparently it ran back out. He died shortly after. She swears that it was a demonic monster-looking creature that came closely described as a dog. This story has made its rounds in her family, and other family members have said it was true. They lived in Copper Hill, Tennessee when this happened. Today's sixth part of the upload. I was camping with my friend, myself, and 3 others at a lake near the town I live. We were all in Minnesota. It was around 10 or 11 p.m., and we were sitting around a fire, talking and whatnot, when all of a sudden, a small rock hits the folding table next to me and my friend. The rock seemed to come from the trees that were between us and the lake. It spooked us a little bit, but we just laughed it off and made jokes about how it was probably a Sasquatch or something. The next morning, we noticed the bag of hamburger buns had what I assumed to be a bite taken out of it. The bite was very clean and basically a big semicircle, similar shape to a human bite, but much larger. The bag was unopened and in a grocery bag with other food items when I found it. The buns were the only thing that had gotten touched. We figured it couldn't have been a dog because of how clean the bite was, and the bag was still on the picnic table at the campsite. The thing that stands out the most to me in thinking it was not an animal was the fact that the bitten bag of buns was put back in the grocery bag. The overall experience was weird. I'm still unsure of what took the bite, but I'm thinking it was not a person or some type of common animal. Today's seventh part of the upload. A close friend of mine, who I've known since we were kids, and he has never lied to me, told me about an encounter he had while we were both living in Washington State. He was shooting in an abandoned quarry when he heard the loudest angry animal howl he has ever heard. He took his 14 gun collection and noped out faster than he had ever ran in his life. He can't tell me what kind of animal it was. He thinks it may have been a Bigfoot or a Dogman. He even searched cryptid sounds online and found one that sounded very similar, and that one claimed to be the sound of a Bigfoot. Today's eighth part of the upload. I live in southern Wisconsin in the country. Lots of trees, ponds, cornfields are all around my area. There's always a really long walking trail usually used for snowmobiles. When I was a kid, early teens, I used to walk on the trail, which was right down the road from my house. To describe the trail, it's pretty much a rocky dirt path, and on each side of the path there's dense trees. One day I took my friend with me. It was like the middle of the day, and it must have been spring or early summer because I really don't remember it being cold and there was definitely no snow. Anyway, so we're there walking and talking about random stuff, and we saw up ahead what looked like a small, dark-colored alligator cross the trail from one wooded part to the other, walking right in front of us. It looked like the size of a medium dog, but low to the ground, and it had a reptilian feature. Kind of looked like a huge turtle without a shell, or a monitor lizard. We both turned around and ran back to my house. We don't have monitor lizards here. We get pretty big turtles, but they need shells to live. Never figured out what it was. Never walked on that trail again. Today's final part of the upload. Bennington County, Vermont. My wife and I set up camp in the early afternoon, cooked some dinner, and left the campsite to go to the swamp overlook and watch for moose or black bear. Conditions were perfect for wildlife viewing, but on this night we didn't see anything. We returned to our camp shortly after dark and started a fire. Sat back and relaxed, enjoying the majestic wilderness. After a couple of hours, a bag of marshmallows and some shooting stars, we heard a strange scream or howl yell come from far across the swamp. At first I thought it might have been a barred owl, so I called to it. The animal, without hesitation, immediately screamed out again, but the sound was a bit more clear this time. The scream did not sound like an owl, but of something I had never heard. I again, mocking the sound I heard, called out again. Same response, without hesitation. This went on for several minutes, until I stopped yelling. After several minutes of silence, we heard the scream again, but a bit closer to us and slightly off from the direction we heard it at first. Curious by this, and beginning to think that it may be a bobcat, though I am an avid outdoorsman and can distinguish the difference in calls of North American wildlife, I again mocked the sound. I heard and got no response from the woods for several minutes. Then a frightening scream from roughly 100 yards away scared the hell out of us. My wife scrambled to plug the spotlights into the car while I grabbed my NE firearm 12-gauge shotgun and loaded 3-inch mag slugs. We shined in the woods for several minutes, but could not see anything. No eye shine, just the trees. I threw a couple of logs onto the fire while my wife stood guard with the gun. We shut the spotlights off, convinced that our mad dash for weapons and lights scared whatever it was away. After a few moments, we heard what sounded like a thump. Then the distinct sounds of sticks and leaf litter crunching. Something was walking in the area we last heard the call, but much, much closer. It sounded like it was 50 yards or less away. We again spotted the tree with our lights, but couldn't see anything. I decided to call out again to see if it would respond, and it did. The forest erupted in the loudest, most blood-curdling scream I had ever heard from over my shoulder out onto the dirt road. My wife was tending to nature when I did this, and she was on the opposite side of the car towards the road. She nearly jumped the car with her pants down. I again shined the spotlight in the direction of the road, and nothing. We heard the sound several more times, along with the sound of the bushes, as if something was walking around our camp. This call would come from all directions. We would put the spotlights out there to see, but saw absolutely nothing every time. We had our dog with us, a 75-pound lab. She was very curious about the sound when it was out in the far distance. She would not take her eyes off the woods in the direction of the sounds. As the sound got closer to us, my dog began to get very restless. She would pace back and forth and watch the woods. As the sound got very close to us, my dog stood behind my legs, watching the trees, and she began to shake profusely. When my wife went to use the restroom and the scream came out from behind the car, the dog crawled under the car and laid there shaking violently. My dog usually will bark at wildlife. She has even ran after a black bear on one encounter in this same forest, but this time she acted like she was as scared as me. This experience ended when the Bennington County Sheriff Patrol car came flying down the dirt road. After the car passed, we didn't hear another sound from the forest. I rigged a line of rope around the car, hung all the pots and pans from along various other items from the camp, and tied off our cooler, placed it on top of the car. We slept in the car that night with a loaded 12 gauge right next to me. Yes, sir. That was a terrifying encounter because, well, I've done and covered the Bennington Triangle. We know there's some sort of creature that lives out there. Actually, there's been numerous sightings of a Sasquatch-like creature, a Dogman-like creature. There's been numerous disappearances. There's a lot of spiritual, paranormal activity out there. So, and it's 45 minutes from my house, so that's friggin' awesome. I love it. I really do. I'm not being, like, joking about it. I think it's very interesting. I got a lot planned that I want to do this summer. I really, really want to do some, like, hands-on, out in the field, getting dirty, bug-bitten. But Bennington Triangle is one place I am definitely going to go with my camera and a couple of other things and just have, like, a really interesting day. I've got a pretty interesting day planned for how I want to do things. Of course, I want to look for cryptids. But I also want to bring my EVP recorder and my SLS camera out there because I'd like to see, because there's been numerous people that have died, supposedly by the beast of the Bennington Triangle. I'd like to see if I can touch bases with their spirits or not. Maybe not, you know, but I think it's going to be cool. And, yeah, I really want to actually do that right at the end of spring, early summer, so June is kind of, I'm setting up for that trip for June. And, yeah, hopefully you guys will be listening along and watching along because I definitely plan on making a video on that one. So with that, guys, I want to thank you very much for always listening, always staying so supportive, and pretty much kicking ass. So hopefully tonight I will do some more early encounters reported in the news. I think we're up to part 12. Sounds like a fun time. Have a great day, guys. See you later. See ya.